It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. You guys know this, most of you at least. And I get a chance to now broadcast games. I will be in the booth Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The Buffalo Bills hosting the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm very much looking forward to the fantasy preview and breakdown of that game. You can check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. Check us out at Ross Tucker Pod. All the various shows. Ani Bose from the NFL, awesome, on today's Ross Tucker Football Podcast, giving us a preview of what's new in the NFL this year from a TV standpoint, which is always fascinating. It is regular season mode, which means this show is now 2 times a week for the next 18 weeks. So we record them both on Wednesday, post one right away Wednesday, post the other one bright and early Thursday. Just an easier way for you guys to digest them. Try to keep them to about that 25 minutes that we like. So we'll get to hopefully all the 1 o'clock games, or as many as we can. And this week, Thursday night, Friday night, in episode 1, then we'll wrap up the rest of them in episode 2. The person doing that is new. John Daigle from Establish the Run. I think those of you that listen or watch the Even Money podcast, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, you've heard John come on to talk about prop bets for the draft. Obviously, Establish the Run is where our buddy Evan Silva is one of the guys over there. He was the OG co-host on this show. Evan and I were together probably about 5 or 6 years. And then Joe Dolan and myself about 4 years. Shout out to Joe again for the terrific job. And now it's a new era. It's Fantasy Feast 3.0 with John Daigle. Here's what you need to know. He's a star. Used to be at Roto World, back when Roto World was like the only fantasy place. He's a huge part of what Adam Levitan and Evan Silva are doing over at EstablishTheRun.com, where, by the way, it's not too late to use the code FEAST and get a discount. So you get all of Levitan's stuff, all of Evan's stuff, and all of John's stuff, which is amazing, at Not J Daigle, D-A-I-G-L-E. John, officially welcome to the Fantasy Feast family, man. I'm happy to have you.
I don't know how I follow up that introduction, but I will say I am friends with Joe Dolan, and I'm very excited to be friends with you and this new adventure we're doing many times for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. All right, so here's how we do it for during the regular season. We talk about the notable fantasy guys that matter in each game, and really the things that are interesting about it, right? Not like, hey, you might want to have Christian McCaffrey in your lineup, right? Like, if you drafted him, you should. It's more or less matchups that we really like or don't like for certain fantasy guys, just so you can know for setting your lineup, or for those of you that play daily fantasy over at DraftKings. So, John, let's start. How about the first 2 games, man? I mean, the first 2 games, Thursday night and Friday night, involved 4 of the top 7 teams in the Ross Tucker Football Podcast Power Rankings. We'll start Ravens and Chiefs on Thursday night. Who are the notables that we really need to discuss here? Obviously, with the Ravens having a new running back in Derrick Henry.
And we know who we're still starting in this game between Henry, Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson. But I will say I am worried about the Ravens offense, not only because they're shuffling in 3 new offensive linemen, but we do have 4 career games with Steve Spagnuolo, Chiefs defensive coordinator, versus Lamar Jackson. And in those games, Lamar has only completed 57% of his passes for 6.5 yards per attempt, been limited to 3 total touchdowns and 3 picks. So I do think the Chiefs defense could win this one outright. Having said that, when Andrews was on the field last year, he led every tight end in fantasy points per game and was second in the league in red zone scores. So that's why for the whole season, I am calling Mark Andrews leading the league, or leading his position, I should say, in touchdowns. Andrews is the guy I really want in this game in terms of who to play from the Ravens side of the ball.
Ooh, I like that. Good note on Andrews for sure. Your point about the Ravens offensive line is very, very well taken. Just out of curiosity, John, since he is new there, how high have you been, are you on Derrick Henry in purple?
Henry's floor continues to be safe in fantasy just because the construction of what the Ravens offense is. Their defense helped build significant leads throughout the year last year, so we didn't even get to see what they would do from Lamar Jackson and one-score game scripts throughout the season. But honestly, the way they handle it, we know Derrick Henry's going to get his 20-plus carries, and that he has to fall in the end zone since he's never been a player. Although he's explosive, he's never been someone to earn targets going back to Tennessee.
What about on the other side for the Chiefs? They did pick up Samaje Perine recently, Clyde Edwards-Helaire on NFI. I don't know if any of that makes any difference to you whatsoever. Those guys are not the most fantasy relevant guys of all time. Your thoughts on the Chiefs offense, especially maybe receiver?
And by using the promo code FEAST, you can read the waiver wire, which I've already completed for everyone and established the run. And you'll notice that I did have Samaje Perine quite high, if only because, remember, the Chiefs go into bye in week 6, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is on the non-football injury list for at least 4 games. So there's really no way to know if he's going to be out for just those 4 games or through October 20th when the Chiefs return from their bye in week 7. Thus, Perine is a good pickup just in case something were to happen to Isaiah Pacheco. Having said that, Pacheco's still the player we should be very high on here, if only because of his usage in the postseason last year without Jerick McKinnon and without CEH. They showed, the Chiefs coaching staff did, that they don't mind riding Pacheco for over 18 touches per game. He's a player I'm very high on from week 1 and for the rest of the season. But you mentioned the Chiefs receivers, and without Marquise Brown dealing with an injury, probably returning in week 2, at least for this game, they have no choice but to throw out explosive rookie Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice. And remember, it took until the second half of the season for Rice to become a full-time player, but when he did over those last 2 games, he averaged 16.9 PPR points per game, which tied DJ Moore for the wide receiver 9 in weekly fantasy points. So we're talking about Rice quietly being a wide receiver 1, not the wide receiver 2 or 3 he was last year.
Wow, interesting. Love it. What about Friday night? Packers and the Eagles. Eagles will be without linebacker Devin White. Just found that out right before we started recording.
And let's start with the Packers offensive side of the ball, because they did give Josh Jacobs a massive contract in free agency. And given the injuries behind Jacobs to both rookie Marshawn Lloyd and who we expect to be their pass-catching back, at least this week, Emmanuel Wilson, there's a real chance that Jacobs' floor won't be higher in any game this year. Whether that matters is what we're trying to figure out, since over his last 18 games, he's averaged 3.6 yards per carry and really been unable to break tackles, perhaps due to that 2022 season when they put the Raiders 390 touches on his belt, and he's been trying to shake it off since. I also think what's important to note for this Packers offense is that Christian Watson was someone who, for his career, has dealt with chronic knee and hamstring injuries. And since the start of OTAs to the end of training camp, The Athletic reported that Watson actually didn't miss a single practice. And he's someone who literally breaks fantasy football at a position, even in his last 2 starts prior to injury last year before the postseason, averaging a 23.5% target share in those games. So Christian Watson is someone that I want to go right back to this week and forget about last year's injury concerns.
Love it. What about when the Eagles have the ball? They got a lot of weapons, John. I'm curious how you and the guys established the run are kind of breaking it down. Adding Saquon and even Jahan Dotson to a talented group.
And Will Shipley, their rookie, did mix in on passing downs throughout the preseason ahead of Barkley. I don't think it's going to be too much of a timeshare, though, here this week. Barkley will still have the floor we're all expecting as a first, second-round player when everyone got him in home leagues. But really, we have to ignore what happened in the second half of the season when Jalen Hurts was playing through multiple injuries and averaged 6.5 yards per attempt and only 7.5 carries per game. For his career, by the way, he's averaged over 12 carries per game. So we know he wasn't at full strength going into that playoff loss against the Bucs. And now he transitions into Kellen Moore's playbook, who we know will at least give the Eagles a lot of volume on the year and in this game. Even the Cowboys' offenses never finished any lower than top 6 in plays per game under Moore with Dak Prescott. So given all of that and this particular situation with the Packers' upgrades, both in defensive coordinator and adding Xavier McKinney to their secondary, I think where it's really going to open up is shallow into the middle of the field, which helps out Devonta Smith, who has been 4th in the league in yards per route run from the slot, and we expect him to play the slot role in Kellen Moore's new offense, and Dallas Goedert, who also dealt with his own injuries last year, but prior to that, had increased his yards per game in 4 consecutive seasons. Those are the 2 players I'm watching to be sneaky scoring points here for the Eagles.
Okay, let's get to some of the Sunday 1 o'clock games, and we'll start with the Atlanta Falcons. Kirk Cousins, new-look Falcons, hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers, who at least are going to start the game with Russell Wilson.
And Pittsburgh fans are going to see why Atlanta fans had been so upset the last 3 years under Arthur Smith, because no team had a higher run play rate from neutral game script within one score of your opponent than the Falcons under Smith these last 3 seasons. I do expect it to be a heavy Najee Harris game in particular, since Jaylen Warren has been dealing with an injury the last month of preseason. So Harris is someone I'm firing up immediately. Not only that, but I am admittedly worried about Pat Freiermuth, and that's something I'm going to monitor this week, because at least throughout the preseason on their first string snaps, as Arthur Smith did with Kyle Pitts the last 3 years, Freiermuth was interchangeable and switching with both Connor Hayward and Darnell Washington. So Freiermuth is someone who has been viewed as a tight end 1 to this point, but I'm concerned that he may be closer to droppable once we see his usage in this game.
Wow. Okay, I didn't even know that. That's a good nugget. What about the Atlanta Falcons offensively? I know a lot of people are really high on Bijan this year.
It's not only Bijan, it's the rise of the Falcons offense altogether. We expect new offensive coordinator Zach Robinson to mirror both Sean McVay, the play he comes from, and Kevin O'Connell, who also came out from that Sean McVay coaching tree, and lead the league, if not rival the top of the league, in wide receiver routes and 3 wide sets. And I know it doesn't seem like it, since the last 2 years, Drake London has been the wide receiver 48 and wide receiver 46 in fantasy points per game, but he's actually been targeted on the 14th most routes of any receiver in that time. It's just that those targets were coming from Desmond Ridder. But now we believe he's getting a massive upgrade in Kirk Cousins, who obviously understands this playbook, having been under Kevin O'Connell the past couple of seasons. So Drake London is a riser that we had established the run. We're adamant to select in the 3rd round of your home leagues, and I genuinely think he can be a first-round player in 2025. So that's the name here to watch who could explode in this one.
Ooh, love it. That's juicy, John. What about the Cardinals and the Bills? It'll be in Buffalo. I'll be there. In fact, Thursday night, I'll be at Danny's South near Orchard Park drinking some Labatt Blue Lights with me and living life to the power of we. Hopefully anybody that lives within an hour of Western New York can be there Thursday night drinking some Labatt Blue Lights. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. I don't know that I realized until prepping for this game, John, just how well both these teams ran the ball last year.
Oh, the Cardinals are one of the sneakiest offenses in the league under who I believe is one of the, if not the best young and upcoming future head coach, and Drew Petzing. And with Kyler Murray returning from week 10 on, the Cardinals averaged 5.3 yards per play, 11th in the league. They scored points on 42.5% of their drives, and they actually tied the 49ers with a league-high rate of 10-yard runs. And that was not only due to Murray, who averaged 5.3 rushing points per game as the QB7 in that time, but it was also due to James Conner, who finished before his injury with 5 consecutive top 12 finishes. And the Cardinals have already come out under Jonathan Gannon and said that Connor continues to be a bell cow. I expect him to be that in this game, and I expect the Cardinals to surprise too, given that it's the first offseason Kyler's had, not only at full strength, but with explosive rookie Marvin Harrison Jr. and, of course, Trey McBride. A full offseason to integrate these pieces along with Petzing and James Conner. I think the Cardinals' offense is poised for points. It's a good game to call. I'm actually jealous of you, Ross.
Nice. All right, what about the Bills, especially their receivers that have gotten so much conversation?
And it's unfortunate because right now those receivers are dealing with injury, especially with Curtis Samuel. I don't know how limited, if at all, he'll be in this game, but it sounds as if it's someone who could start the season slow after suffering an injury this preseason. But we do know at least that under Joe Brady, the last time those two guys overlapped in Carolina, Curtis Samuel did record not only a career high in carries, but a career high in fantasy points per game. For this game, though, I think the sleeper to watch, given those injuries, is Khalil Shakur. Because to this point, perhaps because Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis have been ahead of him for his career, Shakur has only run 24 career routes from 2 wide sets. But once Joe Brady took over last year, Shakur popped with a 22.5% target share. So he's the guy who I think can lead this team in targets, at least for this game. Not only that, but on the defensive side of the ball, the Bills lost, unfortunately, Matt Milano to a torn pec, at least in this first half of the season. And remember, when they were going through these middle linebacker entries headed into the postseason last year, that's when they started getting tagged by tight ends. Pat Freiermuth put 75 yards on them. Everyone remembers Travis Kelce going for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. So I think the leading receiver for the Cardinals here can actually be Trey McBride to take advantage of those injuries in Buffalo's defense.
Good stuff, John. What about Titans and the Bears?
It's going to be fun because I know what the Titans want to do. They already showed us in drafting a left tackle in J.C. Latham at number 7 overall and giving their full assurance to Will Levis under center, adding Calvin Ridley for the most guaranteed money in free agency, and signing Tony Pollard, a receiving back, as the second running back in the open market. Brian Callahan told us that they want to live and die by the pass. The issue in this first game is that I do not think people realize the Bears dropped a Super Bowl caliber defense on the field from week 6 on whenever they acquired Montez Sweat. Because in that time with Jalen Johnson healthy, the Bears literally led the league in limiting explosive passes. Gains of 15 yards through the air, were 4th in EPA per play, and allowed the 5th fewest yards per attempt. So I do think Callahan is going to allow Levis to drop back, and Calvin Ridley, especially given DeAndre Hopkins' injury he suffered, that we're expecting him to limit him and force him to be less efficient in these first couple of games. I think Calvin Ridley is someone here who stands out, who's going to get sandwiched with volume. But will there be immense success for the Titans and Will Levis in this first week? I genuinely don't think so, and that's what I'm worried about for the Titans offense in this one.
And the Bears?
I am as excited as you to see Caleb Williams put it all on the field and Shane Waldron's 3 wide sets with all of Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. We also believe that given DeAndre Swift, I mentioned Tony Pollard being signed as the second running back in the open market. DeAndre Swift was first. In a market with Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, the Bears went directly to DeAndre Swift as a pass-catching back and said, this is the guy we want. And I believe that means it's going to be a Caleb Williams-led offense heavily. Historically, we've seen rookies coddled out the gates. And so I don't think it's one that Rome Odunze really gets on the board in an immediate wide receiver 2 or 3 fashion. I still believe it's going to be DJ Moore and Keenan Allen who are the best fantasy pieces in this game. But Odunze is still someone we're watching for the second half of the season and who can maybe overthrow Allen as we continue along just because of who he is and profiling closer to Justin Jefferson than anyone else. 6'3", 212, led the nation in both targets 20 yards downfield and contested catches last year with Washington. So although I don't think this is a game that Odunze explodes, he's still someone we want to stash similar to a league-winning running back that we have for the postseason fantasy run.
What about the Patriots and the Bengals, John? What if anything, are we saying about the Patriots right now offensively?
That's about it, right? After Jacoby Brissett struggles in the preseason, it's no surprise they started him over Drake May, just given their offensive line shuffling and struggles without Cole Strange there. And admittedly, we don't even know who's going to play in 2 and 3 wide receiver sets in this offense to begin with. Kendrick Bourne still in the PUP list and out the first 4 games. Demario Douglas missed most of the preseason, even though I do think he'll lead this team in targets, whatever that means in this one. And of course, Jalen Polk getting integrated as a rookie. But really the only thing that stands out is if they can have success, oddly enough, I think it's on the ground. Because the Bengals did face 169 carries last year without stud defensive tackle DJ Reader, who signed with the Lions this offseason. And in those carries, they allowed 5.1 yards per attempt. So I think the Bengals are quietly more susceptible on the ground than anywhere else. It's really just a matter of, do the Patriots hang around long enough to play that style of ball?
And then the Bengals offensively, as we're recording this, we still don't know if Jamar Chase is going to play or not.
We don't. But for this one, I'm not sure how much it matters. Of course, it helps them for the rest of the season. But not only do we know that T. Higgins in 5 career starts without Jamar Chase has averaged 14.5 points per game and 92 yards in those contests as well, but the Bengals and myself are really high on sophomore Andre Yoshivas, who I listed in the waiver wire column as someone who is a wide receiver 2 or 3 for fantasy this week, a player we should be starting if Jamar Chase doesn't get this extension done and misses this game. Yoshivas, by the way, 6'3", 205, ran a 4.40 at that size coming out of college, and has just been a stud both in camp and the preseason. Not only that, but his competition, Jermaine Burton, the rookie out of Alabama, struggled in the preseason mightily, running the wrong route several times, has also reportedly had off-field concerns. So it really seems like there's a direct 2-person target share here, whether Chase plays or not, between T. Higgins and Andre Yoshivas, who could be argued as the sleeper of the week.
Shout out to Yosivas from Princeton University, my alma mater, where I drank more than my fair share of Smirnoff because it's the perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails. It's the world's #1 vodka, official vodka partner of the NFL. So you should grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer and head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. What about the Texans and the Colts and these young quarterbacks, John?
It could be a fun one if we get both offenses unleashed. Let's start with the Texans side of the ball, because in terms of how the Colts will scheme for them, we know Gus Bradley, wherever he's been, across the Jaguars, Las Vegas, and Indianapolis the past couple of seasons, has led the league in zone coverage. That's what he does. Plays cover 3 and doesn't get out of it no matter the matchup. And CJ Stroud last year was one of the best quarterbacks against zone coverage. It's really just a matter of if their offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, will unleash it, given that everything they did this offseason, including adding Stephon Diggs in the slot, shows that they want to continue building around CJ Stroud. And because of that zone defense, I think Diggs is the player to be high on in this spot. Top 10 in target rate against zone coverage last year. And really is the player that can settle down in the middle of the field and take advantage of the shallow portion. So I think Diggs gets peppered with targets here. And we'll see how Tank Dell's integrated in his first game back following last year's season-ending knee injury. But as it stands, Diggs, Nico Collins, those are the 2 players to really be high on in this game, assuming Slowick unleashes the ball and doesn't just lean on Joe Mixon, who could also be really effective as a high-floor RB2 in this one.
And the Colts on the other side?
Anthony Richardson only played 4 games last year, but still led every quarterback with double-digit rushing points per game. With Richardson under center, that Shane Steichen offense also led the league in plays per game. They really picked up the pace when he was under center. We have Jonathan Taylor at full strength too. So those are the 2 players who I know everyone is starting, but that's really who I think succeeds in this game. What we're monitoring here is Josh Downs and if he'll play, and if so, how effective he'll be following a high ankle sprain, which we know limits players for 4 to 6 weeks, and he really only suffered it 2 to 3 weeks ago. And if that's the case, I think we're going to get a good glimpse of rookie A.D. Mitchell out of Texas. He played in the slot in place of Downs in the preseason once Downs suffered that injury. And although he didn't produce substantially in college, he is still a freak athlete who's going to be on the field in a game that has a 49.5 point total. So I think that's a sleeper in this one.
John, you are awesome. What a great start. I'm fired up for episode number 2. It's the Fantasy Feast. I'm stuffed, but I got room for dessert.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.